can I tell an embarrassing personal story?
Bring it.
I kind of enjoy like theme parks, Disney World, Universal Studios. And one of the things I enjoy about those is when you go to one of the resorts, you can just take the bus the whole time. And I think
Sure.
even people who drive everywhere in their normal lives, enjoy taking the bus to the theme park, not having to worry about parking. It feels like a vacation when you do that
I'll admit I've never been to a theme park.
because you're
Um,
cooler than me. I'm
no, no, no,
uncool.
no. There was no judgment in that. I want to be clear.
We're rolling. We're rolling.
Rolling on tap people. This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.
So it's Wagenius, right?
Wagenius. Yep.
Wagenius. And I've been thinking about your name, and I'm tempted to say Wagenius. Do you get that a lot?
I get that a lot, and to be really precise, it's 3 syllables, Wagenius, with the emphasis on the middle syllable. But I'm not doctrinaire about it because my uncle got it wrong, and it's his name. So
Right. And are you familiar with the Nintendo characters Wario and Waluigi? Like the evil versions of Mario and Luigi are Wario and Waluigi.
are you serious?
And
You'd think somebody would have teased me with that before now.
your name translated into Nintendo is Evil Genius, I think.
Oh wow, I kind of like that. I kind of like that a lot, actually.
I thought I would start the show that way. So this is the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards, and my guest today is Peter Wagenius, who is the legislative director, political director for Sierra Club
That's it.
Northstar Chapter, which is Minnesota's version of the Sierra Club,
Yep.
Minnesota's chapter, and a former policy director for Mayors Rybak and Hodges.
That's it. You got it.
Okay. And we're mostly here to talk about Hennepin Avenue, but I thought I would start by, since you're from the Sierra Club, by asking, what does it mean to be an urban environmentalist? Because I think a lot of people's conception of what that is, an environmentalist, is we're protecting wide open spaces, forests, trees, mountains, animals. But what does it mean for our urban spaces, our streets, our housing? Because that's the perspective I approach it from. I think it's relevant what we do in cities, like how we live our lives in cities is relevant to caring about the environment.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you put it in that frame because we need to look at this through a historical lens. Environmentalism used to be not just positive about wide open spaces, but explicitly negative about cities. It was, Teddy Roosevelt, we got to have national parks. We got to get those poor, beleaguered kids out of those horrible, dark, satanic mills, out of those horrible cities and into the bright sunshine, the clean air of the countryside. And, that history is a history we have to move away from because the reality that we now understand, and it's in the data, is that cities are essential to addressing climate change, that they're essential to our future. And if I can, I want to share one map with you, which I think was transformative to me. Jeff Speck has written about it in his great book. And it was transformative to me because I lived it in real time. People used to ask a really simplistic question. Well, where do the climate emissions come from? Well, they come from where people are, right? And people are in these metro areas. And around the turn of the century, people started to ask a better question, a more specific question. Where within cities do the emissions come from? And what we learned is that the emissions are dramatically less coming out of cities, dense areas, than they are out of suburban areas. And there's a whole list of reasons for that. In cities, when people drive, they tend to drive fewer miles, shorter distances between destinations. They're more likely to take transit. They're more likely to bike. They're more likely to walk. They are more likely to live in multifamily housing, which is much more efficient to heat and cool. And this research that was done at the time has only been built upon since then. These maps, this is from the Chicago area, these maps exist of cities all around the world, and it's the same story everywhere. It is the same story everywhere. And in addition to heating and cooling buildings, in addition to reduced emissions from transportation, it even goes to materials. When you're trying to bring materials, whether it's laying fiber optic cable or whatever, or sewer pipes or other pipes through great distances from people who are far apart from one another, it requires a lot more resources. So there's a whole list of reasons, but the data is really clear. Living in cities is good for the climate.
And maybe rearranging our streets to allow people to take fewer car trips.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is what this episode is about.
And every aspect of that, I'll take this down, but feel free to show it whenever it's helpful to you. Every aspect of that is helpful to the climate. It's helpful to public health in terms of what we're breathing. It's helpful on multiple environmental levels. It's also helpful on multiple levels of social and economic justice. People who live in Minneapolis should feel good about living in Minneapolis. It doesn't mean you couldn't negate the climate advantage of living in Minneapolis through other things. If you're riding with Elon Musk on his stupid rocket for thrills, you're putting an incredible amount of emissions into the world. But all other factors being equal, living in cities is good.
So I've talked a lot about Hennepin Avenue on the podcast, so people probably know about the redesign and the reconstruction that's coming up. And within shortly here, I don't know exactly when, but the council is going to have a public hearing. They're going to vote on the redesign. And so Hennepin is one of those terrible 4-lane streets in the city. And so the plan is to do a 4-3 conversion, which has a lot of efficiency advantages in terms of left turn lanes so that there's less chaos with people swerving. It's got an elevated sidewalk level bike lane. It's so far, these are the recommendations from the city's public works staff. It's got a bus lane, which I'm really excited about because I ride transit a ton. So it seems like the stakes are at this point, the bike lane is baked in, left turn lanes are baked in, a lot of the pedestrian improvements are baked in, and seem pretty certain to pass. The bus lane is what's at stake, whether that's going to be an all-day, full-time bus lane or something less, or maybe no bus lane at all. It's up in the air. You're supportive of that, right? That's a good idea.
Absolutely. It's not just a good idea, it's essential. It'll be the difference between this project, this huge investment of state dollars, hobbling out of the gate on day one of E-Line BRT service, or being like something we can totally be proud of and replicate all around the region. Not every street needs a dedicated lane for transit. Not every street can accommodate a dedicated lane to transit, but Hennepin can, and it needs it. So Sierra Club is strongly supportive. And I was strongly supportive in my previous role at City Hall.
Some of the factors are the city has a transportation action plan that is very specific about what we would do in cases like Hennepin Avenue. It's a street through a very dense neighborhood. As you say, it's getting a BRT, $60 million in state investment to upgrade the corridor. And I've been following this for a long time. I was surprised to see some of the strong statements from Metro Transit about how essential this is to the success of this investment, the E-Line coming up. Do they normally issue such strong statements in support of something like a bus lane? I had been under the impression they just left it to the cities to make the mistakes that they are apt to make.
It may be a little unusual, but only because they haven't needed to make these kind of statements in the past. I know the people who've been working on this at Metro Transit, and they've rolled out arterial bus rapid transit projects in the order that they've done so for a reason. They deliberately had the first project, Snelling Avenue, the A-Line, be a project that didn't go to and from a downtown. They wanted to test some of the other features of arterial BRT. The next line, the C-Line on Penn Avenue, is the first arterial BRT line that reached to downtown. And now they're doing one through a dense, complicated area between downtown Minneapolis and downtown St. Paul. So that's part of what they're reacting to, is the sequence of projects. But here's the other thing they're reacting to. They don't know what the city of Minneapolis is going to do, and they didn't need to worry about that. The city council in Minneapolis has a long history of doing what is necessary in order to make huge investments of state dollars work. They have a history of making the decisions that are necessary to take full advantage, to maximize the benefit of state and federal investments. And they're understandably needing to say more because it's not clear what the city council is going to do. That's surprising to me, but if you look at the history, I think they're reacting to the circumstances. I mean, I know there are some people who fear change, who would suggest that dedicating lanes to transit would somehow be radical. But if you actually look at what the city's been doing over the past 20 years, maybe even the past 40 years, it's clear that not dedicating lanes on Hennepin as part of a full reconstruction, as part of a $60 million state-funded transit project, not dedicating lanes, that would actually be radical and a big shift from what the city has done in the past. Not dedicating lanes between uptown and downtown would frankly be a rejection of decades of previous leadership by previous city councils. And I think they want to make the case because they understand the price that we would all pay if E-Line BRT doesn't perform really well on day one.
Should we talk a little bit about that history and all the ways that the city council and the city has acted to put dedicated transit space on our streets? What are some like good examples of that?
Yeah, well, and I think we can talk about, there's a letter coming to the city that is going to describe all 12 times. I counted 12, and there's perhaps more. I'm not the universal authority. 12 previous times where the city of Minneapolis took a vote to dedicate street right-of-way to transit lanes, that right-of-way that had previously not been dedicated. And when I look at that list, that history, four things really emerge for me pretty quickly as common themes. First of all is unanimity. Most of those decisions were unanimous votes of the city council. It wasn't some battle. It wasn't some divisive thing between the moderates and the progressives. Most of the votes were unanimous. Number two, when there was opposition to dedicating lanes to transit, it was often from property owners, sometimes business owners, but we shouldn't confuse the two. Property owners and business and landowners are not necessarily the same, or other wealthy individuals who feared negative impacts on their businesses, including on parking. The other theme is that while those concerns are sometimes legitimate, they're always overblown beyond their actual impact. We never liked construction, but the final product in all these cases, it did not hurt businesses, because it turns out transit riders are also customers, and transit-oriented development brings even more. The final theme, when you look at all 12 times that the city council dedicated right-of-way to transit, is we never went back. They were always successful. It was always a good idea. Of the 12 times that I counted that this Minneapolis City Council has dedicated right-of-way to transit, only one time was it ever reversed. And that was because it was upgraded and replaced by an even better facility on a neighboring street. So I'm happy to talk about any of those examples, but I think they're really instructive, and I hope the city council follows the lead of their predecessors going back 20, 30, 40 years.
So one thing you mentioned about businesses, I have noticed when I watch like a meeting of the Uptown Special Service District, it's largely landlords speaking for the business community. The Uptown Association, whenever you read a quote from them in an article, it's typically a large landlord. So I think it's important to make a distinction between local business and large landlords. And that's not to say that there aren't local businesses who are also freaking out about parking. But I don't know that it's a a data-based concern. It feels like a knee-jerk reaction to the loss of parking. And as you say, we've had these fights many times before. It's not as though these things were easy to accomplish. There was the same complaints, the same arguments. It was a big deal, controversies in some cases, and they happened. They turned out well, and they are not reversed.
That's right. That's right. And one of the first times, maybe not the first time, but one of the really stark times that I saw the very important distinction you're making was the approval of the very first tenure transportation action plan by the city of Minneapolis in 2007. This was a really big change. We were making decisions about Hennepin, Nicollet, Marquette in second, third, fourth, fifth, all at the same time, because we realized the accumulated decisions up to that point had created a mess of problems on multiple streets. And there was concern, legitimate concerns, legitimate questions, and we needed to work through that in a stakeholder process. But it was notable that in the final negotiation, the downtown council was an entity that we could work with. And the Building Owners and Managers Association, BOMA, was a lot more hostile. And I noticed that with several times, because if you think about who are building owners and managers, well, they're representing building owners. The downtown council includes corporations like Target, and they have employees who loved taking transit. I remember them telling me what a godsend it was for them when they were trying to recruit creative talent to the city of Minneapolis to be able to say, oh, get off on the train at the airport and come into downtown. And new talent would say, you have a train in Minneapolis? That was a godsend, because it mitigated against the idea that this was some kind of cold podunk backwater. So I'm not saying I agreed with the downtown council on everything, but they at least answered to multiple constituencies, including employees. But when it's just property owners, it's a much more difficult conversation. They're much more separated from all of the vast portions of the population that benefit from these transit projects.
When I think about the 2040 plan, the city has said we need to add lots more housing. It's important to build a dense pedestrianized city in terms of climate change. But when you build density, and we're building density in this neighborhood that I live in adjacent to Hennepin Avenue, if you don't support successful transit into the future, you are encouraging those people to drive more. If you had gone the other way, and if you go the other way and support transit and support these dedicated lanes, you're making it far more likely they will not get in a car. They will choose to take the bus, not because they want to save the planet, but because it's easy. You've made it easy for them to do this. They're doing a good thing because it makes their life better, because I don't think we can count on people to do the right thing because they want to save the planet. I'm sorry to tell the legislative director from the Sierra Club this. I don't think we have enough people out there going around living their lives to save the planet. I think we have to make people's lives easier to choose to do these things.
Oh, you're not hurting my brain as a Sierra Club lobbyist. I only want the outcome. I want the environmental outcome. If people do it because it's the right thing to do for public health, for breathing, it doesn't need to be for climate. If they do it for economic competitiveness, it doesn't need to be for climate. If they do it for racial equity, it doesn't need to be for climate. If they do it for convenience and saving money in their household, the outcome is the only thing that matters to me. I don't know your community as well as you do. In the 90s, I had a girlfriend who lived at 24th and Lyndale, and I loved 24th and Lyndale. I loved everything that was accessible to me. But I know what you're talking about, because I live really close to Central Corridor, the Green Line, between downtown Minneapolis and downtown St. Paul. And I'm not just riding Green Line all the time. I'm seeing a wave of development, mostly from the west, moving east. And those folks are starting their transportation habits on day one of moving in, based around the service that exists. And this is why it is so important that Hennepin Avenue and E-Line BRT succeed from day one. Because if it's screwed up on day one and then we have to fix it later, we've sent a terrible message. we will be impacting all those decisions you're talking about. We have to make it convenient on day one.
Can we go into the history of Marquette and Second, which are those lanes dedicated that I don't think I've ever ridden on? Maybe I have, but they're for commuters into downtown, and how those came to be.
Yeah. Oh, I love telling this story because I heard Scott Dibble, the chair of the Transportation Committee, former chair in the Senate, now leading Democrat, say, we do a disservice when we roll out these projects and we celebrate the kumbaya that is true when you're cutting the ribbon. We do a disservice because it gives people the impression that that's how these projects happen. It was a fight. It was an over year-long negotiation. But it's helpful to begin by understanding just how messed up things were before this project. Marquette and Second was about a lot more than Marquette and Second. Before Marquette and Second was built, downtown transit was a mess. And I mean, every north-south street was a mess. Hennepin Avenue, Nicollet, Marquette, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. All of those streets had both local buses and express buses. And the express buses would overwhelm the local buses during the peak hour, and the buses wouldn't move. Every bus would move only as fast as the slowest bus. Buses could not pass each other. And the fact that it might have been reliable outside the peak hour did not help you if it wasn't reliable in the peak hour. And Robert Lilligren passed the money right at the beginning of his second term, 2005. And we spent $1 million on a plan, and people were so skeptical. Why are you spending $1 million when you don't have the money to build this stuff? You only have the money to plan. Well, it turned out that investment of $1 million got us $34 million of federal money because we did our plan just in time to take advantage of a funding stream from the Bush administration called the Urban Partnership Agreement. But they needed to know, do we have the plan to fix things? And with all those local and express bounce all mixed up, with every bus as fast only as the slowest bus, we never would have been able to add Orange Line BRT. They never would have funded that. It would have been hard to justify switching Hennepin Avenue and First to two-way streets, which everybody wanted to do. Everybody said that they wanted to do that. And the solution was to separate local buses from express buses. And I've got a great graphic I'll share this with you, where we took all the express buses, we consolidated them onto an expanded facility on Marquette and Second, and that allowed all the buses on Hennepin, on Nicollet, in particular, to start flowing again, because it's only the 10, the 11, the 25, the 17, not mixed up with all these peak hour buses. So the benefits went beyond Marquette and Second. But on Marquette and Second, with all those buses in the peak hour, you really needed them to have the ability to pass each other, which buses never had. Buses never had the ability to pass each other on these streets. So we went from single lanes, which had existed since 1974, to double lanes. And doing that doesn't double capacity, it more than triples capacity. And so we were able to consolidate all those buses, and it was a year-long negotiation. There were compromises that I hated making. You'll see in the vote that we kicked bikes off of Marquette and Second. I did not like doing that. I dedicated my time. I wasn't going to leave City Hall until we built a better facility on Third, and it took years. But the Mark II project was the right thing to do because of all the things that allowed.
I mean, speaking of Third Avenue, I remember the fight over Third Avenue, unless there was a different fight over Third Avenue before my time. So on a lot of these things, whether it's the Transportation Action Plan, which is like the greatest thing ever if the city would just stick to the plan they adopted. Lisa Goodman was the only dissent. Lisa Goodman was a big roadblock to changing Third Ave, and she successfully roadblocked that on the 4-3 conversion. She is the roadblock here again on Hennepin Avenue through my neighborhood, adding the bus lane. What role did she play on Marquette and Second? I remember from the 2017 campaign that her opposition to that was raised by her opponent. So can you go into the Goodman role in all of this?
Yeah, it's not a fun memory because I was really proud of myself. I got a lot of the downtown business interests from opposed to to neutral or positive. Sam Grabarski said nice things. He understood if we want 2A Hennepin, we need to make other changes. It's a system. It had to work. Sam Grabarski was the head of the downtown council at the time. And we made sacrifices that I thought would be persuasive to everybody. I went to every council member who represented a transit rider on the 10, the 11, the 17, the 25. I wanted them to make sure they knew this isn't just about suburban riders on Marquette and 2nd. This is about your riders from your ward, from your neighborhood going into downtown. And I thought, I sound naive, I thought that would be persuasive with Lisa Goodman. I also thought she explicitly campaigned on really wanting 2A Hennepin back, and the engineers said it's a system. We need this in order to make that happen. And I thought that would be the difference maker. It wasn't. She was the one vote. It was 12-1. Everybody voted for it, except Councilmember Goodman. And when I say I lost her vote, I mean I really lost it. She would not talk to me for over a year, because it wasn't just that we prevailed. We prevailed on against her. It was in her ward. I mean, ultimately, the fact that the downtown council as an entity was, I can't remember if they were positive or neutral, but IDS was still opposed. There were some powerful individuals who were opposed, and we couldn't get her on board. In completeness, it's worth noting that there was also a big desire at the time from some people to eliminate buses from Nicollet Mall. Thankfully, the vote to just eliminate buses from Nicollet Mall outright was not offered. But Councilmember Goodman offered an amendment to eliminate buses after 6 p.m. in 6 months of the year. And I know as you're hearing this, you're thinking, eliminating them from part of the day, that doesn't work. No, it doesn't. You can't eliminate buses from part of the day. You can't have transit riders think to themselves, oh, well, I can pick it up at 5:55, but I can't pick it up at 6:05. I have to walk to it.
There's a widespread misconception that transit riders don't really have any place to go. They're just kind of hanging out downtown. Whatever.
Yeah.
There's no bus here. I'll just sit at the bus stop for 3 hours and wait, or I'll ask somebody, do you know where the buses are right now? Like, people on buses have places to go. It matters that they get delayed. It matters to people's lives. It's a real problem with people who make these decisions can't relate to people who ride the bus. If you go and talk to people, which Hennepin, I've got a lot of friends working for Hennepin for People, which is advocating for the bus lanes, and they have gone and talked to transit riders, and they've made some videos. I've seen it. And like the perspective on the street from people who like cross Hennepin on foot on a daily basis, they ride the bus. There's a lot of excitement here. And if you only talk to the business community, if you only talk to the landlords and you only serve them, it's the wrong perspective to approach this from, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And again, I don't mean to sound naive. I was under no illusions about how Councilmember Goodman felt about bus transit. She'd made her feelings clear, already at that point. But the system, it wasn't just about Marquette and 2nd. It wasn't just about IDS being unhappy. The system benefited everybody downtown. That's why Sam Grabarski said the nice things that he said. The buses flowing on Nicollet Mall, the 2A Hennepin, 2A First. The fact that we could make a credible case to the federal government, which was, we approved both the federal application and the transportation action plan on the same day. That's how urgent it was to move forward. I thought that would be persuasive, and it wasn't. But democracy still works. If Hennepin Avenue proceeds on a 12-1 vote just like that, passed on a 12-1 vote, a 12-1 vote still works. I would be perfectly happy if Hennepin Avenue, a good version of Hennepin Avenue that succeeds on day one, passed with a 12-1 vote. It's worth remembering too, while the 12-1 vote for the plan as a whole was the biggest development from a policy standpoint, the vote to not kick buses off of Nicollet Mall in the evenings for 6 months, we prevailed over Goodman on that one on a 7-6 vote. I can find that for you. I'm sure I have the date somewhere. I could find that for you, and it'd be interesting to see who voted which way on that one. But I know it was a 1-vote margin, and everybody was talking about it, how close that was. So
we should re-emphasize again that the Hennepin Avenue design with the bus lanes has a staff recommendation. I remember this was supposed to be the inform stage. Like, this is what the staff recommendation is. This is what will go to the city council. We've done our public engagement, and the city council will take a vote. I'm not so sure that staff recommendation makes it to the city council without being changed by our new public works director. Do you have any insight on how that process works? I mean, it's important that the staff recommendation goes to the council unchanged, without political interference, as we got it before we had a new public works director. I think
it is really important, and it's not that I think staff recommendations in and of themselves are sacred, but when a staff recommendation comes forward with a project like this, after months and months and months, and you know the details of the process. I've been over at the legislature. You know the details of that better than I do. And we know it's consistent with the city's objectives. It would be unprecedented for one of the very first actions of a new public works director to be to throw out that staff recommendation. I mean, I think about the previous public works directors. That would have been big news if Robin or Steve or Clara had walked in the door and said, my professional staff, I'm changing their recommendation. That would have been a very big deal. And I say that as somebody who, I was appointed to the Sustainable Transportation Advisory Council by Margaret Anderson Kelleher. I liked the fact that she was MnDOT commissioner. I respected the fact that she was listening to people and, appointing people like me and Katie Jones to this committee, knowing full well we were going to be critical of MnDOT. But if this is what the new administration is how they're going to begin this new term, to say staff recommendation gets tossed out the door, that would be pretty unprecedented in my 20-plus year experience of the city.
Yeah, and to be clear, we're like 4 years into the engagement process on this, so it really is.
Oh, absolutely.
It really is a last minute. No, we're not going to do this. All the work you've done on this is. No, we're not going to do it.
I've been out of the city for 5 years at this point, but just to give you a sense of how far in this has been working, when I was still at the city, we were talking about sequencing the Hennepin Avenue project on this section of Hennepin, as well as the downtown section, with arterial bus rapid transit, anticipating applications for federal dollars. I mean, this was planned years in advance. Going back beyond the explicit planning process for this specific segment of the corridor, E-Line will succeed or not fully succeed and take advantage or not take advantage of a year's worth of work, depending on the decision the council makes.
We'll be right back after these messages.
So you will, if we can't get Taylor on the line, you will play the role of Debbie in sales and perhaps respond to my reading of the ad. That's all that will. Did you see Taylor's version of the
I have.
ad recording?
Yeah.
Wedge Live is sponsored by Dispatch, sending you reports from the bustling Minneapolis and St. Paul arts and culture scene. For May, Dispatch welcomes us all back to Filmtown with a profile on the return of the MSP Film Society in their new home at St. Anthony, Maine. Plus, there's the return of the Red Eye Theater, comedian Maggie Ferris's new album, the Caterwaul Music Festival, and much more. Check it out at dispatchmsp.com. That's dispatchmsp.com. How'd that go?
It was all right.
Here's a curveball. Will electric cars solve climate change? I mean, we don't forget the buses, just electric cars, right?
Okay, so first of all, I own an electric car. If you're going to own a car, please buy an electric car.
Only, I think it's like 3%. 3% of cars sold today, right? Do I have that number correct? Are electric. So 97% of the cars we're putting on the road currently are gas consuming, polluting cars.
Actually, the percentage of new cars is in the last quarter as a percentage of total new sales is actually significantly better than that. But that doesn't. But let's go back to the beginning of your question.
Okay.
Even if that number that is getting better doubles, triples, there is no data to support the idea that we can address emissions in the transportation sector through electrification alone. There's no data. And I've been in rooms with National Sierra Club experts, with people paid by vehicle electrification grants who wanted to be able to show it was possible, and they couldn't show that it was possible because the average car is on the road for 12, 16 years, something like that, and we will have blown through our carbon budget long before we get to that point. Plus there's the availability of lithium and other metals for batteries. There's just no data to support the idea we can address transportation emissions through electrification alone. We have to reduce vehicle miles traveled. That is unambiguous in the data. Unambiguous. And frankly, when you think about, so I was on the stack when we recommended that the state have a 20% VMT goal, together with an aggressive plan on electrification. If that's the goal that we have as a state, it's easy to understand, even if we don't have a specific number yet, that the number in the metropolitan area needs to be higher than 20%, which means the number in Minneapolis needs to be even higher than that. So if we can't do this on Hennepin Avenue, from a climate perspective, let's stop pretending that we're serious about the climate. That's my Sierra Club official environmental response. And that's somebody who promotes electric cars all the time. It's good, it's not enough.
We love you, electric cars, but you're not enough. We need to make space for buses too. And also, to go back to something, I don't know if we talked about this earlier or what, but there's not enough. I think maybe I wrote something recently. There's not enough space on the streets for everyone to drive. Just we're not adding street miles. Minneapolis is pretty built up, and so to abandon the idea of buses as this thing we don't really need to prioritize. No, we want more people riding transit. It's essential for people's quality of life, whether it's affording transportation or simply having a livable city, even if you don't care about the climate. And you should care about the climate.
That's absolutely right. And like I said before, I just want the outcome. We love talking about co-benefits, the benefits to public health, the benefits to safety crossing the street. The benefits to racial equity and access to jobs. I'll talk about all the benefits because they're all real. But I'm sorry, your original question.
I think we were talking about electric cars. And
okay.
I was saying we don't have enough space on the streets.
Enough space.
Even if everyone had an electric car, that would be terrible because you'd be stuck in traffic all the time.
Oh, absolutely. We're a city and we have to act like a city. And when we do act like a city, we succeed. We've been very successful with our projects. There are transit projects in this region that have struggled. Red Line, which doesn't come to downtown Minneapolis.
Does that go to the zoo?
It goes from
zoo? I think I took that bus to the zoo.
I don't even know if it gets to the zoo. It goes on Cedar Avenue through the southern suburbs near my in-laws, and it goes up to the Mall of America. It doesn't get anywhere near Minneapolis. Northstar has struggled because it relies on suburban commuters. But all the Minneapolis projects have succeeded. Blue Line, Green Line, C Line, Mark II. They succeeded because of exactly what you're talking about. And to look at the converse of that, what happens if we actually think we can address everything through cars alone? Jarrett Walker, who wrote Human Transit, has a great... I encourage people to look at some of his videos on YouTube. He has a key point. Technology will never change geometry. He likes to say, you can't fit an elephant in a wine glass. It doesn't matter what technology you bring to bear. You can't fit the number of cars on Minneapolis city streets in order to accommodate everybody. It just doesn't work. And what I've seen at the Capitol, and it's worth taking just a brief tour to the Capitol, because this is where I spend my time, is the rationale for not investing in transit is constantly shifting, right? We shouldn't invest in transit because the economy's good or because the economy's bad. We shouldn't because gas prices are too low or because they're too high. Because Uber and Lyft will change everything. That was the one from a couple of years ago. It will change everything. It actually made things worse. That's demonstrable in the data now. And the second latest is self-driving cars will change everything. But again, to your point, it doesn't change geometry. You can't fit that many cars. But the latest rationale is COVID. And can I just, I'm going to sound angry here for a second.
I've heard that one locally. Like, you're going to say Republicans are saying this? And I hadn't heard that personally, but it makes sense. But I've heard that coming out of the new public works director, that COVID, ridership is down because of COVID, and therefore we can't support we have to wait. We have to wait until it recovers. Well, the way it recovers is you support it. If we had that rationale for like local business was hurt by COVID, therefore local business, you just sit on the sidelines until you get better. No, we say we're going to support the recovery of business.
Wow. Okay. So.
But tell me about the GOP.
Let me tell you what's happening at the Capitol right now. Literally yesterday, Republican legislators who have no love for Minneapolis, let's be clear about that, or public transit, let's be clear about that, who deny the existence of climate change, let's be clear about that. They literally voted on it. We do not acknowledge the existence of human climate change. We have recorded votes. To justify their opposition to further investment in transit, they are making a very convenient argument about COVID-19. And their argument is, Minnesotans must get back to normal in every aspect of our lives as soon as possible, except transit. In this one aspect of our lives, we will never get back to normal and the pandemic will rage forever.
It's permanent.
They are literally making that argument to defund and cancel the Northstar Commuter Rail project. They're making that argument, so their lead argument, to prevent Botno from moving forward and to stop dedicating 40% of revenue from the motor vehicle sales tax to transit, even though that provision was literally adopted by Minnesota voters in 2007. So that argument is the Republicans' lead argument, and I'm going to go further. I participate in this weekly call called FRED. I don't know why it's called FRED. The F is, I think, supposed to stand for federal. It's where I get to talk to the Sierra Club lobbyists in all the other states, and we compare notes. I assume this argument about COVID means we should stop funding transit is coming from the Koch brothers or from ALEC, because I'm hearing it from all my colleagues in other states. It is literally the go-to Republican talking point, because Uber and Lyft doesn't make any sense anymore, because all their previous arguments don't make sense. It's their new argument. So that argument should not be coming from anybody in the city of Minneapolis. I don't want to hear a Koch argument, a Republican legislator's argument that's being used nationwide to damage our efforts nationwide come out of the city of Minneapolis. That's if that's happening, that's awful.
Yeah, because there will be a life after COVID. We're going to be, it's going to be a common thing to go out to a restaurant with your friends. It's going to return to being a thing that you will take the bus downtown to make your life more pleasant and not have to sit in traffic.
And if Sam Rockwell were here, he would be able to cite some very specific statistics. But let me just say, the idea that we're not going to get back to normal ignores research on virus transmission, that ventilation on transit buses is actually much, much better than many workplaces. Okay? It ignores that COVID-induced decline in ridership on urban corridors, like Hennepin, was much smaller than the system-wide average. There's a reason why the ridership on Blue Line and Green Line and all the Minneapolis city buses was relatively stable compared with all these commuter routes. So it's a dumb idea to use COVID as a justification in general to avoid investments in transit, but it's a particularly bad argument in urban transit and on routes like Hennepin, because the ridership on these routes dropped a lot less than commuter-based routes. And of course, the final point is this argument ignores the reality that we have to substantially reduce VMT or we are not going to address our climate emissions. There is no data to support that we can address climate emissions through electrification alone. There just isn't.
Also the case that BRT also has not had the steep decline that other routes have had. Is that correct?
That's right. A line and C line both had a 20% ridership bump when they opened, and the drop afterwards in the pandemic has been significantly smaller than the statewide average, than the metro-wide average. Excuse me.
Can I tell an embarrassing personal story?
Bring it.
I kind of enjoy like theme parks, Disney World, Universal Studios. And one of the things I enjoy about those is when you go to one of the resorts, you can just take the bus the whole time. And I think even people who drive everywhere in their normal lives, enjoy taking the bus to the theme park, not having to worry about parking. It feels like a vacation when you do that, to take the bus. So I don't know. I thought I would tell that story. It's really nice to take the bus and avoid traffic. I think even people who don't normally take a city bus will understand that when they go to a resort or a theme park.
Yeah, well, and I'll admit I've never been to a theme park.
Because you're cooler than me. I'm uncool.
No. There was no judgment in that. I want to be clear. But if you've ever been, you don't even need to have been to a European city, although if you have been to a European city, the places that people love to go on vacations, or even a Canadian city for that, the places that people love to go are the places that have the facilities like we're hoping to build, and that the city professional staff has recommended that we build on Hennepin Avenue. Those are the places people are attracted to. People don't say, I really want to go to Paris to check out their suburbs. Although, frankly, their suburbs would be more transit-oriented than many of our cities in America. People like this. It succeeds. And can I just... Well, at some point, we should talk about Central Corridor LRT.
Okay. Do you know what my favorite European city is?
No. Bring it.
Epcot.
You pulled me into it, that one.
Yeah.
EPCOT, because it's, what is it that EPCOT is? What does it stand for?
So it's all the various countries. It's next to Disney World, and it's, you've got Norway, and I don't know what the cities are, but it's basically a trip around the world in one place. You don't have to go to Europe. Don't bother with Europe. Just go to EPCOT. You could take the monorail into EPCOT.
There you go. I'll put that on my dance card for my next trip. If people like me are still allowed in Florida. That's in Florida, right?
Yes, it's in Orlando.
DeSantis might put up a wall. I don't think he wants people like me in Florida. But
right. Yeah. So where were you trying to take the conversation before I asked you about my favorite European city?
Well, I could imagine somebody hearing my story about Marquette and Second. And again, its benefits on Nicollet, its benefits on allowing two-way Hennepin and the bus system downtown to function. I could imagine people saying, oh, well, that's a nice thought, Peter, but that's not a parallel experience with Hennepin Avenue, because Hennepin Avenue is a retail street. Marquette and Second aren't retail streets. Fair point. So let's talk about Washington Avenue. Let's talk about University Avenue from Washington Avenue, where it ends, all the way to downtown St. Paul. I'm talking about Green Line LRT. This is another one of these things where, we cut the ribbon and everybody, talked about the kumbaya and how great it was, which gives you a distorted picture of how unbelievably hard it was to make that project happen. So LRT was never going to work between downtown Minneapolis and downtown St. Paul if it didn't have a dedicated lane. And in order to implement a dedicated lane, we had to make big decisions, including we basically eliminated all parking on both Washington and University Avenue all the way between the two downtowns. Now, you might say, well, between downtown Minneapolis and the river, that's not, there wasn't anything in there. That's true. But from the river, through the Minneapolis campus, through the remainder of Washington Avenue, and through University, past the border, all the way to downtown St. Paul, there basically isn't parking anywhere there anymore. And there was a lot of what you would expect, concerns from businesses about, what is this going to do to us? And mind you, that was LRT construction. That was not arterial BRT construction. That was rail construction. That was construction that lasted 3 or 4 years. And so I don't dismiss at all the concerns of businesses about construction. Construction sucks. But again, construction is inevitable if you're doing a rebuild from scratch. even if you didn't have a dedicated transit lane at the end, you're going to have those impacts. And when you're building rail with electric power, it's basically adding a year or more onto that project. So legitimate concerns raised, but there were also concerns raised, including in Stadium Village, all along the corridor, about the loss of parking afterwards. And I'll try to see if I can find the videos for you. But there was a multi-city entity called the Central Corridor Funders Collaborative, and they interviewed people along the way, along the corridor, including the owner of Midway Books, at Snelling University, about how terrible it was that they were going to lose, after enduring construction, then they were going to lose parking, in front of their businesses, and what a disaster that was going to be. And they interviewed people afterwards, and everybody said, yeah, it turned out to be fine. I mean, don't get me wrong, construction still sucked, and St. Paul and Minneapolis went to great lengths to try and maintain business access during construction, and I assume the city's going to do that here, and they should, and people should patronize businesses during construction, and they can, and they did here, and they should here. They did on the Green Line, and they should here. But the idea of, if we don't have parking after the fact, that's going to ruin the businesses, was disproved on Green Line between the two downtowns. It's been disproved all around the country on similar projects, because here's the thing, and landlords can't always appreciate this, but if you talk to workers at businesses, they often can appreciate this. It turns out that transit riders are customers.
Yeah.
It turns out that people who move into new buildings, transit-oriented development, are even more customers. And this has been, it was documented by the Central Corridors Funders Collaborative. The ridership exceeded estimates like 10 years in advance, ridership targets, 10 years in advance. And as if it didn't succeeded on day one, it also continues to succeed because it's attracting people to the corridor who want to use the facility. I see it every day, biking my daughter on our cargo bike to her preschool in Dinkytown. We're counting the cranes. The development we talked about is still happening. It's fantastic. So I don't dismiss the concerns about construction impacts, but this idea that therefore we should use COVID now as a justification for after, it's stacking exaggerated fear on exaggerated fear to say that the businesses are not going to be able to succeed. We should do everything we can to help them succeed, including, non-corridor parking strategies, and the city has tools for that, and I hope they roll those out. But if the transit lane falls victim to that, that is operating outside of best practices, not just from around the country, but from our very own region.
I can assure you those people exist, because I remember very vividly when I moved to Minneapolis, I looked, where are the buses? Where are the grocery stores? I was drawn to this area because I would be able to live without a car, because I could ride the bus, because it was bikeable. Like, it matters. It draws people in. People will be riding these buses. People will choose to live here because of the BRT with the bus lane. That is real.
Oh, it's absolutely real. And frankly, that's another topic of conversation at the Capitol. If we've educated people with state dollars in Minnesota public schools, where do you want them to go after they've graduated? Do you want them to go to Seattle and Denver and bring their talents to other regions? I'd prefer that students educated in Minnesota public schools can stay here. And we know that they are attracted to places like, because I see them every day along the Green Line, as an example. I want to tell you one other quick thing, if I could, about the Green Line, because while parking was eliminated all the way in between the two, on the university campus, and this is the big fight that I think at least some of your listeners will remember, is we not only eliminated parking, we eliminated all private auto traffic from a portion of the university campus. And let me tell you, the same dynamic, the university dynamic of that same story plays out. The workers at the hospital, the nurses at the hospital, the students at the students on campus, we got a lot of supportive comments. But the administration at the U and some wealthy donors and doctors at the hospital who wanted their preferred parking. They still have parking, by the way, but they wanted to be able to access it from either direction. Made it seem like this was going to be the hospital would cease to function, the university would be a disaster. The university administration disparaged their own students, and it ended up that they're all going to be drunk and they're going to be walking across the tracks and they're going to get killed. And I'm thinking to myself, you understand they're in greater danger from the trucks that are on Washington Avenue right now than they are from the train, which doesn't swerve. It's very predictable in how it behaves. They were disparaging their own students who were going to be drunk and killed. And what needed to happen was Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the Metro Transit all kind of ganged up on the university to say, you got to do this and you got to do this right. And we did the studies. We leaned heavily on our professional staff at the city, and they figured out that, no, if we close it from Pleasant to Walnut, we're going to be fine. And they had the numbers to show it, the same kind of numbers. Alan Klugman is not a radical. When they say that their initial recommendation on Hennepin Avenue will work, I trust them. But powerful people with money, made it really painful. There were times when I was worried we were gonna jeopardize federal funding because the university threatened to sue over it. But the city of Minneapolis did what was necessary, and this city council can do it. Again, most of these votes have been unanimous, including these. The city did the right thing. They took a strong line. They had a vision for the future. They did it then, and they can do it again. And I don't mean 13 Cam Gordons. I mean the entire city council. Moderates, progressives, they all, for all these 12 votes, including that one, they decided to move forward into the future and not be afraid of it, but to shape it rather than be afraid of it.
Yeah, this is not some far out scheme. The city has professional public works staff. We have plans and policies adopted. This makes all the sense in the world, as long as you're not caving to some knee-jerk reactions. I was going to make this my closing thought here before we go to you for your closing thought. Driving is so incredibly easy and convenient in this city, and let's sacrifice a tiny bit of that. And it's an extremely tiny bit of that convenience that we're going to sacrifice here, because driving and parking will still be incredibly easy. I don't know if people realize this if they haven't both been in a car and on a bus, the difference in convenience there. We're asking for the tiniest of compromises to make such a huge improvement to the transit experience on Hennepin Avenue. Let's consider both sides here. Maybe get on a bus one of these days and travel that way. See how that works for you.
That completely resonates with me, and let me just add this. The legitimate concerns and the just plain fear of change can all get mixed up together, like fear of construction and fear of the design afterwards. I look at this design and I say to myself, people are going to love this. They're going to love it when it's done, if we can do what was brought forward, the initial recommendation. It is going to be the kind of thing that attracts people. They rescued this old building in Prospect Park. There's a couple old buildings. There's the Malcolm Yard's food court. You're not supposed to call it a food court because that sounds like a mall, but there's the O'Shaughnessy Distillery. There's the Surly Brewing. People love it. They come here for this kind of thing. And the way you get past this is to respect the legitimate concerns, but not, and try to accommodate them, but not sacrifice the design in such a way where it's messed up on, at the beginning and has to be fixed later. The other thing that I took from that experience is that when they said the university is opposed, well, the university wasn't opposed. It's a group of constituencies, and there were a lot of people within that. And I think if people talk to people who work at businesses in Uptown and work and live along the corridor, I mean, you've seen the data already. This design was popular. Didn't I see it was over 70% support in something that Katie Jones emailed me? You know this stuff better than I do. Ultimately, just like with Marquette and Second, just like with Green Line, the real question is, whose city is this? Whose city is this? The ridership is low because of COVID argument isn't actually the real reason we're having this conversation about potentially downgrading a great design. That's the rationale. It's not the reason. The real reason is because some property owners, some donors have more political power than all of the many, many, many people who would benefit from a safer, pro-transit, pro-climate design. That's the real question. The real question is, whose city is this? And when we decided on Mark II that it was everybody's city, when we decided on Green Line that it's everybody's city, when the city council decided 12 times this is everybody's city, we realized that it was successful afterwards. And we had no regrets. We could potentially, and forgive me, I have one last, the other thought here is what Minneapolis does really matters. We are the biggest city in Minnesota. We lead the upper Midwest. I'm visiting Duluth and Rochester to talk about things that they're doing, arterial BRT in Rochester, dedicated bike lanes in Duluth. And I'm talking in these communities because they're inspired by what Minneapolis has done. If we can't do this here in a progressive city, like if we can't do the best version, the version that maximizes the value of this state investment, if we can't do that here, it sends a really bad message. It sends a really bad message.
Yeah, we can set an example. If it's going to succeed anywhere, it's going to succeed right here in Hennepin Avenue. I know this. I live here. This is the place to set the standard. We can do it if we just follow what the professionals are telling you your plans and policies say that we should do. Peter Wagenius, I think we're done. This was a great conversation. Thank you for joining me.
You bet. Happy to be here. Katie Jones said I would have fun. I had fun. Okay. Thank you for drawing attention to this. It's really important.
Thank you, Katie, for vouching for me.
I didn't need her to vouch for you, by the way. But there's a big grassroots movement that is pushing for this, and I appreciate what you're doing, what she's doing, what everybody is doing to make sure everybody's voice is heard. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter Wagenius. This has been the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. Thank you for listening.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.